Sports history is packed with some seriously bizarre moments, from a black hat cursing the Chicago Cubs on the field to an Olympic marathon where runners dodged wild dogs, and even a football game paused mid-play for a solar eclipse. Sports have seen it all. Ever heard of the Fog Bowl, where NFL players vanished into the mist, or a goose attacking a golfer on the green? And don't forget the chaos of the Malice at the Palace, where an NBA brawl spilled into the stands. Today, we're counting down the top 10 weirdest events in sports history. Starting off at number 10, picture this. It's Game 1 of the 1969 baseball season, and the Chicago Cubs are dominating the league, with dreams of finally winning the World Series. But in early September, they're up against the New York Mets, a rising but still underestimated team. During a pivotal game, something strange happens. In the fourth inning, with the Cubs up to bat, a mysterious black hat wanders onto the field. It slinks right in front of the Cubs' dugout, pausing and staring at the players, especially at the Cubs' legendary third baseman, Ron Santo. The players just stand there, watching as this omen-like black cat takes its sweet time walking past them before darting back into the stands. What happened next? The Cubs, who'd been one of the top teams that season, began a downward spiral. After that game, they lost 17 of their final 25 matchups, while the Mets went on a hot streak and clinched the National League title. Then, in an incredible underdog victory, they won the World Series, becoming the Miracle Mets. To this day, fans talk about the black cat incident as a turning point in baseball history, wondering if that stray feline really was an unlucky omen for the Cubs. Was it just coincidence, or did a single black cat help the Mets pull off one of the sport's most shocking upsets? Coming up next, at number 9, did you know one of the most bizarre games in NFL history is known as the Fog Bowl? It was a playoff showdown between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Chicago Bears on December 31st, 1988, and started like any normal game. But then, in the second quarter, a thick, eerie fog suddenly rolled in from Lake Michigan, completely swallowing Soldier Field. The fog was so dense that players could barely see beyond a few yards, and fans had no idea what was going on. Broadcasters, they were just as lost, struggling to describe plays they could barely see themselves. Even referees had to rely on the crowd's reaction and sideline clues to make calls. Imagine a game where you can hear the cheer and hits, but you can't see a thing. The strange part? Despite the near zero visibility, both teams kept playing. The Eagles quarterback, Randall Cunningham, threw for over 400 yards, but the Bears managed to hold on, winning 20-12. The fog never lifted, and it left everyone questioning what might have happened in clearer conditions. The Fog Bowl became legendary, not just because of the score, but for its surreal, ghostly atmosphere. To this day, it's remembered as one of the weirdest and most unforgettable moments in sports history, proving that in football, sometimes you've got to tackle the elements too. Up next, at number 8, it's July 24th, 1983, and the Kansas City Royals are down against the New York Yankees. Ninth inning, 2 outs. George Brett steps up to the plate, swings, and bam, he hits a 2-run homer, giving the Royals a lead. But what happens next is one of the weirdest moments in sports history. The Yankees manager, Billy Martin, notices something unusual about Brett's bat. He argues that Brett has too much pine tar on it, a sticky substance players use for grip. The rule says pine tar can't extend more than 18 inches up the bat, and Brett's bat goes over the limit. The umpires measure and agree. They call Brett out, and just like that, the Yankees win the game. But here's the kicker. Brett loses it. He charges out of the dugout, furious, ready to take on anyone. It's chaos. The footage of him storming the field became legendary. The Royals protest the ruling, and a few weeks later, the league sides with them, deciding Brett's homer counts. They order the game to resume from that moment. So on August 18th, the teams meet again, but only for a bizarre 12-minute rematch to officially close the game, starting right after Brett's homer. The Royals hold their lead and win for real. The pine tar game became a symbol of baseball's strange and unique history, blending bizarre rules with unforgettable moments. And Brett's iconic wild-eyed charge, it's still one of the most memorable outbursts in baseball. Up next, at number 7, imagine this, a golf shot on the moon. Yes, it really happened. In 1971, astronaut Alan Shepard brought a makeshift golf club on the Apollo 14 mission, just the head of a 6-iron taped to a tool handle. Out there in the vastness of space, he swung with a little one-handed style, his movements clumsy in the bulky spacesuit. But when he made contact, the ball sailed high and far. With gravity only about a sixth of what it is on Earth, the ball likely traveled over a mile, possibly making it the longest golf shot ever. It's one of the most bizarre moments in sports history. Not only did he make golf history, but he added a surreal, playful touch to a groundbreaking scientific mission. Shepard quipped that he sent his ball miles and miles and miles, and while we may never know the exact distance, we do know it's somewhere up there, on the moon, maybe forever. Coming up next, at number 6, did you know about the longest baseball game ever? This bizarre record was set in 1981, when the Pawtucket Red Sox faced the Rochester Red Wings in a minor league game that lasted a jaw-dropping 33 innings. It began on April 18 at 8:25 p.m., but by sunrise, players, coaches, and even the fans were running on pure adrenaline. The game was still going when the sun came up, and it had already hit the 8-hour mark. Eventually, they had to pause it at 4:07 a.m. Even the umpires had had enough. When the game resumed 2 months later, it took only 18 more minutes for Pawtucket to finally score the winning run, bringing the total game time to 8 hours and 25 minutes. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just about endurance. The game saw wild stats and almost surreal moments. Players were too exhausted to cheer or celebrate. Future Hall of Famers like Cal Ripken Jr. and Wade Boggs were part of this epic game, barely standing by the end. So why did it happen? Turns out there was a miscommunication in the rulebook on when the game should have been called off, which led to the legendary marathon. To this day, it holds the record as baseball's longest professional game, and it's likely no one's eager to break it. This game didn't just push limits. It's one of the weirdest moments in sports history. Halfway there, at number 5, imagine a world where tennis isn't just played on grass or clay, but on ice. Sounds crazy, right? But this bizarre event actually took place in the 19th century. In 1876, an unusual tennis match occurred on the frozen surfaces of the River Thames in England. It was part of a winter carnival, and the court, well, it was simply marked out on the ice. Players donned their winter attire and traded their typical tennis shoes for ice skates. Talk about a slippery situation. The challenge of sliding around on ice while trying to hit a ball added a whole new layer of difficulty to the game. Spectators were thrilled, watching as players twirled and twirled, sometimes ending up in the water instead of making a serve. Can you imagine the comical scene of tennis balls soaring through the air, only to be followed by a player falling flat on the ice? While the idea of tennis on ice didn't catch on as a permanent sport, it remains one of the weirdest events in sports. Up next, at number 4, picture this. A peaceful day on the golf course, the sun shining, and the sound of birds chirping. But wait, what's that noise? It's a gaggle of geese, and they're not here to play nice. On June 26, 2008, at a tournament in the US Open, things took an unexpected turn. As players lined up their shots, hundreds of geese took flight right onto the green. These feisty fowl decided to crash the event, honking and flapping their wings, turning the golf course into a scene from a wild nature documentary. Players and fans alike were stunned. It wasn't just a minor inconvenience. The geese caused delays, disrupted play, and even gave one player a little surprise as he tried to putt. The bizarre scene was caught on camera, and it quickly went viral. Who knew that a golf tournament could be so foul? Next up, at number 3, did you know that the Olympic marathon holds one of the strangest curses in sports history? It started with the very first Olympic marathon in 1896, when the race favorite was disqualified for taking a shortcut, but things only got weirder over time. In 1904, the race in St. Louis was an absolute nightmare. It was so hot that only 14 out of 32 runners even finished. The winner, Thomas Hicks, was basically carried to the finish line after being given a mix of strychnine, a poison, and brandy to keep him going. He was hallucinating the whole way. Fast forward to the 1908 London Olympics. Italian runner Dorando Pietri collapsed multiple times near the finish, disoriented and exhausted, and had to be helped across the line. He was disqualified, but became a tragic hero. Then in 1912, things took an even darker turn. A Japanese runner named Shizo Kanekuri vanished halfway through the marathon. No one knew where he was, and he became known as the missing marathoner. He reappeared in Japan over 50 years later, having quietly left the race due to exhaustion. And it doesn't end there. The 1972 Munich Olympics marathon saw another strange twist when American runner Frank Shorter thought he'd won, only for an imposter to run into the stadium ahead of him. These bizarre incidents have given the Olympic marathon an almost supernatural reputation. Coincidence? Or is the Olympic marathon truly cursed? Coming up next, at number 2, imagine this. It's November 23rd, 1900, and thousands are gathered for a football game between Michigan and Wisconsin. But then, something incredible happens. Mid-game, the sky begins to darken, not because of storm clouds, but because a solar eclipse is about to sweep across the field. Players and fans watch in awe as daylight fades to twilight, casting an eerie glow over the stadium. For a few minutes, everything stops. The entire stadium, players, coaches, fans, stand frozen, mesmerized by this once-in-a-lifetime event. It's like the universe hit pause on the game itself. This wasn't just any football match. It was a historic rivalry, and tensions were high. But in that moment, nature took over, and the competitive fire cooled for just a bit. When the eclipse passed and the light returned, it was like waking up from a dream. The game resumed, but for those who witnessed it, things didn't feel quite the same. It was one of the rare times when sports and the cosmos collided, literally stopping the game and uniting fans and players in awe. It's still remembered remembered as one of the strangest events in sports history, an unforgettable day when football paused for a solar eclipse. And now, at last but not least, in the world of sports, there are rivalries, and then there's the Malice at the Palace. This was no ordinary game. It was a full-blown brawl that spilled out of the stands and changed the NBA forever. It happened on November 19, 2004, during a heated game between the Indiana Pacers and the Detroit Pistons. With less than a minute left, tensions were already high, and then Pacers' Ron Artest fouled Pistons' Ben Wallace hard. Wallace pushed Artest, sparking a shoving match. Things seemed to cool down until suddenly a fan threw a drink at Artest, who was lying on the scorer's table. That's when all chaos broke loose. Artest charged into the stands, going after the fan he thought threw the drink. Other players, fans, and security got involved, and soon it was an all-out brawl. The scene was surreal. Million-dollar athletes fighting with fans in the crowd. The game was halted, the arena was a mess, and fans and players alike were stunned. The fallout was huge. Artest was suspended for the entire season, with other players facing long suspensions and fines. The NBA tightened security and cracked down on fan behavior, forever changing how the league handled crowd control.